Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday webcast from the Adoption and Fostering Podcast with me, Scott Casson-Rennie,
and me,
Mr. Al Coates. And tonight we are joined by a very special guest. Well, she's very special to us, and hopefully by the end of tonight she'll be very special to everybody. Our lovely friend Jane Pickthall is here with us. Hi, Jane.
Hi there.
She looks really worried, doesn't she?
Hello.
Like, what have I let myself
It's been
in
a
for?
long day. I'm delighted to be here, though. Let's be clear.
Good. And to be fair, we all do know each other, and we've been to the same. Well, we've been in the same places at the same time and things like that. And I've known Jane as long as probably. Well, Al's known you a bit longer, I think, but I've known you quite a long time as well. So, but for those that don't know you, just give us a little introduction to who you are and why you're here. Well, we know why you're here because Al railroaded you into it.
Because I can't say no to anything. Yeah, so I'm Jane Pickthall. I am currently head of the virtual school in North Tyneside. I've been in North Tyneside doing this role for 17 years. And prior to that, I taught in some children's homes down in London. So for over 20 years, I've been sort of just in the world of the education of looked after children. So it's kind of my thing. I'm also a trustee on the National Association of Virtual School Heads, helped set it up. I've been a previous chair, currently in the role of treasurer, and my time is coming to an end very soon, although I'm sure I will be keeping my hand in with around the data because I love it and I can't quite let that go.
So how busy are you at the minute then?
How busy am I at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, with all these things going on and a national lockdown and because you're a parent as well, doing all that, and then actually having to make sure that children and young people within your remit are looked after. I mean, crikey. I mean, a head teacher has it bad, but you must be on a par with that to make sure that children and young people are being looked after. Yeah,
I mean, obviously our children fall into that delightful, vulnerable category. I really can't stand the word. A colleague, virtual school head, a friend of mine, was saying that they were working with a lad and he'd misheard the vulnerable, and he was like, I'm going to school because I'm valuable. And I thought, if only we use that language. We do a lot of work around, what impact language has on our children and young people. And I just thought that said it all. Let's call them valuable and maybe we'll get more of them in for a start. So we're working, the first lockdown, we didn't have huge numbers in school in North Tyneside. This time slightly different. I think people are feeling quite tired. We're all feeling very tired, aren't we? It seems endless. I think none of us expected last March that we would still be sitting here in front of screens trying to keep the world spinning. But it's been really, I have to say, our foster carers have been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. That the homes, where if they are at home, the homeschooling has been absolutely amazing. We had one of our boys got Pupil of the Week last week because he did so much work, and we've got other children who are loving being in school with their friends and their teachers. And I think the relationships that they've had with their teachers have really developed during lockdown because there's been less children in school, and that's worked really well. So we're kind of trying to keep what's going on at home going and what's going on in school going. I've still got some of my teachers are still going into school, my counsellors are still counselling online, and we've kind of, if children are at home and need support, we'll get a Teams call or a WhatsApp or a phone call. And DFE laptops have been sprinkled around North Tyneside to make sure everybody's got that remote learning access. I'm ordering printers and vouchers and making sure everyone's got all the resources they could possibly need. So yeah, it's been busy. And then there's all the strategic stuff that goes on top of that hasn't stopped. It's been very much sort of business as usual. And but yeah, lots of good things, lots of progress has been made as well. So we've certainly not stood still.
Oh, that's interesting because I sort of, it seems like this, like you said, this lockdown feels very different. And I was thinking about across the year, education's had to just, every day is different. Every day there's a new kind of dictate from up on high. Do this, do that, do it better, stop doing it, whatever. Has there been a sense that, has it just been relentless? And you said there's been improvements. So how have you managed the tension of those two things of kind of keeping going forwards whilst keeping everything in the air?
I think I'm one for opportunities. If an opportunity comes our way, we go for it. So we've, where there's been like the Adoption Support Fund had some COVID money, so we thought, well, we'll put a bid in for that for our special guardians, and we managed to produce some films. Our team's unusual as a virtual school. We're not just teachers and education, we're multi-agencies. We've got nurses, we've got counsellors, we've got occupational therapists, educational psychologists, so we're very much on the sort of neurosequential model is our approach. So we kind of got together our educational psychologists and our occupational therapists, and we produced some training materials around the sensory needs of children and young people, because what we were finding is when we're in lockdown and people haven't got the same opportunities to go out and about, we carers and guardians and parents were struggling. So we sort of put together some resources online. We sent out bags full of packs of things that they could do with the sensory activities and things, and so we've just there's been opportunities like that. We've got a mental health assessment pilot in North Tyneside, which is a DFE pilot that we'd started before lockdown, and that got extended, so we've been able to continue with that. And we've actually got the minister coming in a few weeks virtually to talk to us about that. So things like that are still happening. It's been we've got Bernardo's partnership as well that I'm temporarily managing as well on a short-term basis, part-time. But that's absolutely brilliant, because it's all about mental health, and what better time to be focusing on mental health of people. So we've got lots of sort of projects going on in North Tyneside around supporting young people's mental health as well, which again has been really timely. We've got Thrive training going on online, so everything's kind of still happening, but we're just doing it differently. So yeah, good.
So I was thinking that maybe you should set up an estate agents, because you've probably just sold North Tyneside as like a place to come to if you've got children who've got additional needs. So is that you're seeing an influx of people kind of like squeezing themselves over the county line?
Literally camping in parks to be able to access education.
Yeah. No, it does sometimes. We joke about it, but we say, if you're looked after child in North Tyneside, you get a blooming good deal. And I just wish we could offer what we offer for our looked after children for a much wider cohort of children, because it's making a massive difference. We've seen children who've been in sort of specialist settings for quite a long time, who even during lockdown actually got them back into mainstream, and actually that transition for them when we were in lockdown worked brilliantly, because they had smaller groups, they got to make friends, it was very gentle, their transition, and they're absolutely thriving. And I think, yes, there are plenty of children and young people, and I know we're going to talk about our older ones later, but it's hard. It really is hard, but it has worked really well for some young people. So yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you that, because I mean, personally, I found that actually my little one has thrived doing, I don't know why. Maybe it's just my lunches, I don't know, but he seems to have thrived kind of doing the online learning, not being in school. There's less stress, all that sort of stuff. Is that very common?
We saw a lot of that, particularly in the first lockdown. I think when we didn't have as many in school, what we found, those bonds were really strengthening at home, and it was those relationships were building, that safe base was being sort of reinforced. So for us it was a really good time, to and I kind of, the government talk a lot about educational gaps. They never talk about developmental gaps. And actually for our children and young people, once those developmental gaps are closed, then actually the learning comes online and they thrive. And also as a virtual school, it's our bread and butter is helping kids catch up, because we know the impact of trauma and sort of those adverse childhood experiences and how so much learning is missed when a child just isn't there, emotionally, cognitively, because they're just in their survival brain all the time. And so we were kind of be prepared schools. Actually, what comes back might be not that bad, and I think that confidence that's grown, those new skills they've learned, that and I think we'll worry about the learning when we need to, because we can't get away from the fact that it's much harder to learn online. You can't get away from that.
That's really refreshing, because I was talking to someone today who's really struggling, a single parent who's got 2 children, who's got to earn a living as well. And one of the cruxes is they're just overwhelmed with trying to kind of keep everything going. And school is one of those things that they just feel really out of their depth. They're just not a teacher. I could do all these other things. Can I ask you about, you mentioned neurosequential model, and you think school, but you've described kind of this multidisciplinary environment, with nurses and psychotherapists and a whole raft of things. So can you explain that for people who are perhaps not familiar with that, the neurosequential model?
Yeah, it's Dr. Bruce Perry, and to put it simply, is first you work on sort of regulation. That's kind of step 1. Then you work on relationships, step 2, and then you work on the reasoning, step 3. So our model, we believe in trauma recovery. It's very much sort of where we're coming from. So it's a trauma recovery model that is based on child brain development. And so that's why we brought our occupational therapist in, because we were coming into at too high a level. We were missing out that sensory safety bit at the beginning that you need. So she's done some of the sensory attachment training. She's also from a mental health background, so she's a fantastic combination of things that I needed in my team, and didn't realize how much I needed it till I had her. She does a lot of work around regulation, sensory diets, making sure children feel safe, secure, are able to deal with the physical impact of trauma. And then the next stage up is on relationships, and that's where we might use things like theraplay, where we're building relationships between an adult and a child, and whether that's at home or at school, we do both. And then we've kind of got our reasoning bit, which is where our counsellors come in and help young people to verbalise and talk about what's happened to them if they want to, or just how things have made them feel. So we're very much, as much as we would love to take away what's happened to our children, we can't. It's never going to go away. But what we can do is we can help deal with the impact of what's happened to them. That's very much sort of our model. And what we find is once those things are dealt with, the learning comes back on track, and it's they fly, absolutely fly. Our GCSE results last year, when all the exams suddenly got cancelled, my son as well was like, get in. But our children, my work children had worked really hard. My own child, less so. But we had some real high flyers, and we were kind of like really worried. A teacher assessment's going to work for our children? Does all that prejudice around care experienced children, is that going to have an impact? Are they going to get marked low? Nationally, we did a lot of work with Ofqual around that, and saying, that there's a risk here, that there's an unconscious bias. But actually, what we found was our kids did brilliantly, because what we did was we took away the messiness of their lives. The number of young people that they get to exams and the stress is too much for them. Awful things happen, parents come out of prison, or there's some contact, or mum's had a new baby, or there's been some bereavement, and all the things that the trauma that doesn't go away just because they're in care. All that had gone, and we had the most amazing results we've ever had, and it was absolutely fabulous. And it wasn't just those sort of 4s and 5s, we were getting 8s and 9s, so these were high flying kids, but it was a whole cohort of them who have now sort of gone into 6th form and are absolutely flying. But again,
I know you, sorry, I was going to say, just to maybe clarify, so is that specific to North Tyneside, or is that being reflected, because I know you're involved in Navish, is that being reflected across the virtual schools?
It feels like there was some we know, there's no secret that things ended up being marked more generously, and that's kind of was the shambles that happened. But I knew I had a good cohort, but this was a cohort who also benefited from a lot of that extra support that we've been adding to our team over the last few years. So there were kids in that cohort who did brilliantly, not just because they might have been marked more leniently, but they did brilliantly because we got them to a place where they could engage in their learning, and that's what it's about for us. So we use a lot of our Pupil Premium for things that don't necessarily look like they're linked to education, but without them you can't access the education.
Wow.
I would say there's quite a lot of kind of young people who've been through the system, and I'm thinking of my own 2 older children actually in terms of setting exams. That I'm not saying that this would have been perfect situation for them, because it's not a perfect situation, but that kind of scenario would have been great for them. Is there something in this tradition of exams that we've kind of proven maybe that they're not the best thing in the world? I don't know. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, we've got. I am a data geek, and we've got some really interesting data from when the exams changed. So when we went from coursework and modular exams to no coursework, and everything was at the end. That linear sort of all your eggs in one basket approach. And for children and people with SEN who are care experience, their grades plummeted. It didn't seem to impact those that didn't have SEN quite as much, but there was a really clear difference for those who were care experienced with SEN. They particularly struggled with those changes. So I would love there to have been a lesson learned from what's happened with COVID, and we go back to a bit more cushioning and a bit more we have quite a lot that go down the BTEC vocational route, and they were getting distinction stars as well. So that was lovely to see. There are different routes you can take, and there are different exams that sometimes work better for our young people. A lot of our young people that go to university tend to go through that sort of route, but get there maybe a little bit later, but they do still get there taking that different route. So it's about what's right, isn't it, for individuals?
Yeah, of course.
We've not even got to our list of questions yet, but this is good. Can I ask if there's been resistance, this holistic model? And you're caring, you're supporting a specific cohort of children. You've got a responsibility for children who are looked after. You've also got a responsibility for children who are adopted. Or previously looked after, I should say, so that's children who may have been in the foster care system and then have returned home either into special guardianship or back to biological parents, because there'll be some children like that. So have you had opportunities to influence that? Because I know that that's still a relatively new role, isn't it? And it's
yes.
Yes, right, okay.
Tell you a bit about what we do, because actually what we're finding is we are getting more referrals coming in and more inquiries for those families. We have started developing much as a virtual school network. I know we've all started forging much stronger links with our regional adoption agencies. So I'm about to be put on the adoption panel. We're trying to join things up a bit more, but in terms of that support as well, in North Tyneside we offer consultations, because I find it really hard just to offer advice and information over the phone when you don't have the full picture, and you're not doing people justice really, because just because a child is adopted or under a special guardianship order, it doesn't make their needs any less complex than looked after children. So I feel I would love to be able to do exactly what we do for looked after children with the other cohort of children, but unfortunately the funding isn't the same. And obviously we're corporate parents for looked after children. So we offer an educational psychologist or an occupational therapist consultation, depending on what that primary need is. And we could bring together the school and the carer, and we kind of unpick it, and then we'll say, look, this is what you could do with your Pupil Premium Plus that you've got in school. And we try and sort of do it that way, where we kind of, or we can go down an adoption support fund route and try and get some funding that way. That's certainly something we're keen to sort of explore further. So I think, it's growing, and I think that individual work is growing, but there's also all that strategic work and all that general work we do with schools around trauma-informed practice that, we hope benefits, all children, because it's not, it's not just about those that have got care experience, is it? There's plenty of children who are experience adversity in their childhoods, and COVID, we know, is probably making that an awful lot worse for a group of them.
Because you mentioned that there was a prospect of children in need being brought under your umbrella as well, or influence. Do you think that's realistic? Because that's a huge increase in numbers potentially, isn't it, for you to be responsible for?
Yeah, it is. There was obviously the Children in Need review, and that was a recommendation that came out of that. But there's also been further research, a really impressive piece of research from Oxford University, the Rees Centre, where they've taken a whole cohort of children and looked at who's had a social worker, who was ever child in need, who was ever looked after, and what they've found from that is the needs are the same, and actually they need a champion. And I think that's sort of really the role of the virtual school head, is really to champion those children, and to make sure that the services and the system is supporting them. So certainly North Tyneside, I think, there was a time a few years ago where we had these awful sort of ladders of consequences, and, lots of isolation. And I think isolation's got such a different meaning now, hasn't it? And I'm hoping that post-COVID, people won't go back there. I really hope people don't go back there, and that those isolation rooms become nurture spaces and timeout spaces and regulation space, sensory spaces, and really hope that happens. Certainly North Tyneside, we've got a whole theme called Keeping Children in Schools, where the head teachers have kind of taken leadership and ownership of the pupils, and saying, they realised what they were doing. They're just passing kids around the schools, and nothing was ever changing for those children. The outcomes were really poor. They were just, managed moves weren't working. We wouldn't do those for looked after children anyway. But and actually taking a bit more ownership, and that whole sort of ethical leadership stuff, I think is great. And I think heads are really doing an incredible job at the moment, and with these constant changes all the time. And I think all we can do is hope that sort of post-COVID we enter into sort of a different, softer, kinder, gentler world, where we all kind of realise how special we all are to each other. And
that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because once you've experienced something, and you've all experienced it, which, let's face it, we're all experiencing. We might be on a different. I've seen lots of memes on this on social media. We're all going through the same. We're on the same kind of journey with this, but we're just dealing with it all differently. And head teachers are going through COVID as well. We've all got our kind of different side of it. They're trying to teach children. They're putting themselves at risk, and I'm very grateful for every single teacher and head teacher that has opened a school and done that. But on the same side of that, you've then got these children who are going to be suffering from a number of kind of various different things that are going to be quite relatable to our children as well, who have been looked after, or who are adopted, or who are in special guardians, where there's loss. We saw the deaths yesterday, 100,000 people. It's hard to say that we're not all going to be affected by this in some way, shape, or form. I'm grateful, touch wood. We've had 5 deaths that I know of within my extended family, but not anybody really close to me as a result of COVID. But that's not, So, do you think that we can push? I just like the example.
So. I really
toward an educational environment where we remember that actually some of these kids are, some of the kids who were maybe I'm going to be really bad here and say the teachers' pets, right? Because my kids used to call them the TPs. Where they come back to school and they might have suffered from some of this loss and some of this, effects of COVID, and not be those children anymore. And how? I don't know what my question is. I'm just saying, that it's a really kind of, it's an unknown at the minute in 6 months, 12 months time. But to think that schools might actually have a better understanding of some of these losses and you know, the trauma that some of these children have been through.
Well, even the separation, isn't it? Not being able to see your family. You know, that's something that lots of looked after children, you know, have to live with every day. You know, I'm not able to see my parent, I'm not able to see my sibling. Well, you know, we know what that feels like now, don't we? What it, you know, to have that freedom taken off us, and that loss. I think, you know, it's a real opportunity to turn up the empathy, isn't it, and really get people sort of in that zone, and be it's just that being kind, isn't it? I think, you know, this is why I'm sort of with our carers and saying, you know, I know there's some local authorities who are really pushing for looked after children to be back in school, and I was a bit concerned because I think, you know, there's some talk sort of around how you record attendance, and actually if a looked after child has a place in school and they're not going, they're going to be marked as absent. Well, you know, that's not fair, is it? You know, I don't want children to be stigmatized because of their status, you know, and we have to respect that. But yeah, I think it's I can't even remember what I was going to say then now, but yeah. We need to keep not pushing it. I'm really keen not to push it, because I know that we've got a lot of carers with underlying health conditions. We've got a lot of children living with elderly relatives. You know, I think people forget that a lot of children who are on a special guardianship order are living with grandparents, and you know, they're in that more vulnerable category. So we're trying to be kind to everybody, you know, and just say, look, let's just get through this the best we can. We've never been in this situation. Let's be realistic and kind and do our best. I think Brené Brown does I listen to a lot of Brené Brown. I think it's definitely a time for Brené Brown, and just recognising that we're all doing it the best we can in the circumstances we're in, and we mustn't lose sight of that.
So you could, if this career doesn't work out for you, it's touch and go. I reckon there's a real role for you in the North Tyneside Tourist Board. You would get them coming in droves, just flocking in.
Got some beautiful beaches, absolutely gorgeous beaches.
See.
But do you know what the funniest thing is? That Jane has always been like this. Jane has always been like this. That's one of the reasons why I had her speak at my very first conference that I ever arranged, because she was that good. Just that good.
Oh, I've been doing it a long time.
Well, you have.
There's something about sticking with something, isn't there? There's something about kind of sticking with something, and I don't know, there's always something more we can do, and I think, and that's what I love about my job, is that, you know, there's a certain amount of freedom to it. I'm lucky, you know, that we've been able to develop a service that meets needs, because it's not there. You know, we knew what our kids needed, and we've been able to create it, and that's what we do.
And do you think that, because I don't like to say that everybody's doing the same thing, but do you think the majority of your colleagues across, you know, I'm talking about virtual school heads here, do you think the majority of them are doing similar, if not the same, if not, you know, maybe trying to strive to do more, or, you know, are they underfunded? You know, because a lot of places don't have the same amounts of funding in terms of, you know, how it goes with virtual schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think a virtual school head tends to be a pretty creative person. we seem to be cut from the same, you know, similar cloth, where you are, you know, there's a lot of passion out there. There's a lot of people who really want to make a difference to these children, who really, it's, you know, really care, and it's, and will go the extra mile to create a difference, you know, and we'll fight the fight. I think virtual school heads can be a bit feisty, but it is always, you know, to try and change things so it is better for our young people. And some will, you know, be focused more on sort of strategic stuff. We've just done our first survey that we're hoping is going to be sort of an annual occurrence, sort of a state of the nation in virtual schools, because we are worried that there are some who don't have the same access to DCS, for example. So they're maybe not being able to make the difference they really want to make strategically, but they're doing some fantastic work on the ground. And others where they've got massive teams that are doing all sorts of things, and others that have got smaller teams but better services around them, perhaps, and haven't needed it. So I think that, there is so much variation. And obviously we've got the care review now. Just don't talk to me too much about that, because I haven't had time to read all the paperwork yet. But there's an opportunity, isn't there, to kind of sort of not necessarily nationalize, and take a same approach everywhere, because obviously there's so much variation. But to say, why should a child in my authority have a different offer to a child in another authority? And maybe we need to think about some basics. And our children care council have been doing some fantastic work regionally, where all the children care councils came together and tried to level things up a bit and say, right, well what do you get, what's your pocket money allowance, and do you get travel, and do you have to pay council tax? And just so across the northeast now we've got some similarities, so that if you're a looked after child in North Tyneside or Middlesbrough, you're going to get that, there's going to be some equality there. So I think that, that was our children care council. One girl said, I wonder what it would be like to be looked after in another authority. And then out of that came all this work. And now we've got a young person on the National Children Care Council that's been set up. So I think that voice of the child is really important. And it's been really lovely to sort of see that change happen.
Wow. Scott's disappeared in a rather bizarre chain of events. He's probably...
He's just turned up here as my dog.
Yeah, he's transmuted
my
himself.
My dog just came through the door as he disappeared.
Now, I've actually got him. He can hear us, but he can't join in, so I'm tempted to just keep him quiet for a little bit. Can I ask a question? No, I'll put him back.
That's evil. I don't know what happened there.
I don't know what happened.
Blimey.
You got kicked out. I was going to ask a question, and I think this one is really close to a lot of people's hearts, because inevitably children grow up, and I think we were asking this question just through the podcast about what the support that children get once they reach 16 and what that looks like. There's financial implications. Pupil Premium Plus stops, I think, at 16, doesn't it? Does Pupil Premium stop at 16 as well?
It does, but this is something that was on the table. We're hoping that work. Obviously, the finances in the Treasury are, it's tough at the moment, isn't it? Let's be honest. And it was certainly sort of muted. It's certainly on the radar that we need Pupil Premium or some kind of bursary. I think they're kind of looking at sort of thinking about what for maybe young people in FE or so they are looking at that. I make mine stretch anyway, so we kind of keep it. If a child needs, a set of chef's knives, I'll buy them a set of chef's knives. If they need their makeup kit, they get a makeup kit. So we do make it stretch, because obviously those children in year 11, if you extend the financial year, you can do it anyway. And we'll give them 10 driving lessons, and then the leaving care team will top that up if they need more. And we try and do things like that will sort of encourage sort of that ambition and nurturing this desire to work. We've also got a Staying Close pilot in North Tyneside, which is an extension of our children's homes, so that they don't have to go into independence too young. We've just got a counsellor as part of that, because what we were finding, we have not cracked post-16 by any means. Our NEET figures are looking particularly bad at the moment, and particularly about over 18s. Our 16, 17-year-olds are doing much better. But it's hard, I think, once they get onto benefits. And at the moment, when there's so few jobs about, it's just really hard. But another project we've been involved with has been with Becoming the What Works for Children's Social Care. And they've been doing a letter project. So that was another thing we did in lockdown, because we could just post things out to people. And this was involved somebody, a care experienced person in an FE and one in university, writing a letter saying, it may feel like it's a big deal to get to university, but I've done it and I've been in a similar situation, and it's great when you get here and all this support's available. And then set up a helpline and some resources on their website as well to try and encourage young people to sort of stay in education as much as possible, particularly now when there's so few jobs available. So we're doing what we can, and that was a really lovely sort of project. So the letters sort of went out before Christmas. I think we're going to do a bit of follow-up, but this idea that we're just gently keeping things on the radar even during lockdown. And we've also been involved in Core and Voice, have been doing a young person's voice with care leavers called New Belongings. So we've been involved with that as well, which has been, young people were surveyed about what it was like for them in North Tyneside, their experience. I think there were 9 authorities doing that, and asking them about loneliness and support from staff and friendships and well-being and mental health and self-esteem. So again, some really interesting stuff has come out of that around how much our leaving care team have offered and supported, and how that contact they get from them is often the most important, because they actually did it during lockdown as well. So I think we expected them to be saying they were more lonely than they were, but the leaving care workers had obviously done a cracking job of making sure they were there. But
I mean, I guess it's difficult, isn't it, because you are such a progressive authority. Like your team are just ahead of the game, constantly looking for the gaps and constantly looking to try and plug them. Do you think nationally that it is an area of concern post 16? Do you think it's
Definitely.
Where we are letting children down?
Yeah. I mean, it is, not having Pupil Premium, is difficult. We don't even have any performance indicators at Key Stage 5, so we'll get people saying, well, we need to get more in university. It's like, well, if you're not even going to measure what they're doing between leaving school and getting there, what's the point of that? Because actually if you work in a local authority, your performance data is a real driver. And it's so we do need to kind of recognize that journey sort of into adulthood, into financial independence. I don't want our kids on benefits for the rest of their life. I want them to be paying their taxes and knowing what a mortgage is, what life insurance is. What does that mean? And so many of our kids are don't get that opportunity. And I think it's we need to be more aspirational. That sort of Lem Sisse will talk about that and say, as professionals work with these young people, we have to be aspirational and not be aspiring for a life of economic independence and contributing to society and feeling satisfied. We're doing some really interesting, the Bernardo stuff I'm working on at the moment is looking at co-production, and we had a webinar with some Finnish guys with doing their stuff in Finland, but they've done some work with addicts, sort of young adults who were sort of had drug and alcohol issues, and they kind of said to them, right, what do you need? What it was they needed a purpose and people. So they kind of set up bands for them and got them together playing guitars and singing, and but that gave them those two things, that having something to do and having a reason to get together and having people to sort of keep you sane and talk to. And these things don't cost lots of money, and I think it's just about how we can coordinate things better, isn't it? And give young people more opportunity to set some stuff up themselves as well, isn't it?
Do you think there's an attitude in, because I think that primaries really are often nurturing, secondaries less so, and then FE, or post 16, it's like the people are not interested in, we've had families talk to us about off-rolling, because children not meeting that children who had kind of they'd struggled all the way through to GCSE and moved into the levels, and that just support falls away and they're just left sort of high and dry. Do you think there's just sort of this endemic attitude that it's just not conscious? It's just not a bit of the landscape at post sixth form.
I think it is this kind of thing that, well, they're this age, therefore they should be able to do this. And I think we all know that our our children, young people, are not necessarily going to be working at their chronological age, and some of our asks might be beyond them. So it's about making sure the support is there until they're ready, isn't it? And having those opportunities much earlier. I think, when you look at the offer, a lot of the stuff on the Become website from Propel, I think universities over the last few years have done loads to sort of improve the support for care leavers and care experienced young people. But I do think FE is a gap. And I think training providers as well, where you don't always get the training in place around trauma and attachment. And so a kid might kick off or swear at a tutor and then they're out. And then there's not that opportunity really to go back and say, well, do you understand where this child is at? Do you understand what's going on for that child? We've developed our supported accommodation offer in North Tyneside. So because what we saw was a really clear link between a child moving into independence and dropping out of education or training. And so we've got our own housing offer now for our young people, and they're all in education. And as soon as there's a problem, a member of staff will come to me or my team and go, oh, help, this is happening. We've got our own connections advisor for our care leavers and looked after children as well. So we've got those supports in place to try and maintain those placements and making sure they've got the qualifications in the first place to get onto the courses they actually want to do. Because I think what we were finding is loads of kids weren't getting their maths and their English, and then it was the having to keep doing their maths was what was making them drop out, not the course that they were doing. So we've put a lot of effort into maths and English support at secondary school to make sure they're in a much stronger position to make that transition.
That's fantastic. Scott's itching to get questions in.
No, it's fine. My questions are now null and void because I've forgotten them because you've just kept yapping over me. So
sorry, you have to tell me to stop.
No, it's not you. Oh, it's not the guest. It's never the guest. Honestly, it's never the guest. Never the guest.
I want to know more about.
Keep going. What do you want to know about Scott?
Come on, Scott.
It's gone now.
It's gone. We've discovered that.
I should have written it down when I had the chance, and then I could have spoke to you later. Jane. It was really insightful as well, but whatever.
So how is homeschool going for you, Jane?
You're not allowed to ask me that.
Hey, come on, talk's cheap. What's it like at home?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Come closer to the screen. Let us see the rings around your eyes.
My daughter is she's quite motivated, but she's not a morning person. And my son, he's now in FE college. I have to say, I've been really impressed with them. They've been organised from day one, having them all online, and it's really clear. His stuff is really clear. If the schools could see what this college has done, it's fantastic. I think there's so much. I think this is the thing I'm finding. There's so much variation between schools, and what their remote teaching offer looks like, and feels like, and how. Some kids are, my daughter's having to scrabble through 100 emails to try and work out what it is she's got to do. Other schools have got Google Classroom set up. Do this, do that. Here's a couple of live lessons, hand this in at this time. And, and I think where it's organised like that, the kids are doing brilliantly, but there's too much variation and too much, the guidance is so unclear. And I think schools are having to juggle so much in terms of they've got more kids in the school, so they're going to have to use teachers to support the kids in the school, and then you've got to have teachers who could do remote learning, and I don't know.
But I guess that personal experience for you really helps to know. Imagine what one of your children, who your work children as you call them, which I think is probably. Well, it seems nice to me that you would say that, because actually they are, aren't they? So that must help you to keep a tab on, how they must be feeling. If they have to search through 100 emails and they're not that kind of person, that you can say, actually, do you know what, that child might need a little bit of help with that, or
Yeah, so we do a lot of. The first lockdown, we just spent so much time just phoning foster carers up and going, how's it going? How are you?
Mm.
You know, this time we've kind of got more of them in school, because I think, you know, just school, you know, schools are very different places now. We know what COVID does. We know how to be COVID safe. We know how to wash our hands and wear masks and socially distance. And, you know, I think there's so much work has been done around that. And actually another thing we've found, you know, we talk a lot about children needing to feel safe. I think COVID has kind of given an opportunity to really emphasize that safety at school. And, you know, people are being really explicit. We're keeping you safe. We need to keep you safe. And so again, I think that's probably another benefit that's come out of it as well. This sort of really explicit care that's being shown, and which is really nice. I think we were worried that there would be kids who weren't going to be able to adhere to the rules, and they would go down a sort of a sanction route. But we haven't seen much of that at all. I can't talk for other areas. That may be completely different in other areas, but I think,
because I know, I mean, we're unfortunate where I live, or fortunate. I'd say we're fortunate actually where we live, because actually schools aren't open at the minute at all. There's no, you know, there's none of this. I mean, bearing in mind I'm in the Republic of Ireland, I'm not in the UK, so they're doing things differently here. So they've not opened any schools, and there is talk of kind of specialist provisions reopening at some point. But when is another matter. But that was really one of our concerns when we thought about our little one going back was, well, what if he coughs? Like purposely because a teacher has wound him up, or what if this is happening, or what if that? And actually, the fact you've kind of just made me think about that, because it didn't happen, because we were in school before they actually opened to say, right, okay, so what are you going to do if this happens? What are you going to do if that happens? And I'm sure that was the last of what they were thinking about just for our young man, but it has an impact on all children, because they're all going to be dealing with this differently, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually there's been some fantastic materials. I have to say this, the DFE have produced some fantastic materials on that wellbeing for return, and there's loads of stuff in it about attachment and trauma, which I wasn't expecting to see. So the fact that that's in there as part of that whole wellbeing stuff, and was really great to see. And, you know, that's being rolled out across the country, and, you know, each bit of drip feeding that we do, you know, Navish have done some work with Ofsted around attachment and trauma, and, you know, and what to look for when you go into a school, and, you know, what makes a good school, you know, for our children, and for all children, because actually if you are trauma aware and attachment informed, you're going to have a much nicer place to learn, aren't you, and to work. So we've been doing a lot of work, and Karen Treesman's been doing some work with Bernard, as we managed to piggyback onto that. And you know, all this stuff about sort of trauma-informed organisations is absolutely fascinating. And I mean, she's done some incredible work on that. And but this idea that trauma, it's not a them and us thing, you know, trauma's everywhere, you know, and we know that there are staff in schools that will have experienced trauma. We know there are staff in schools currently going through some really difficult times. And, you know, the whole sort of mental health agenda it's everybody, isn't it? And it's been useful, I think, for that as well.
And I think what you said earlier was right, that, you know, this is within your area, and you hope that other people are doing it, because I know a lot of kind of young people in further education aren't getting those kind of that support that is needed, and, you know, some of them are only in 2 days a week anyway, but actually
that's it. I know my dad.
Exactly. So it's kind of, you know, I mean, I'm hearing from a number of parents who are, you know, struggling to kind of keep their young adults entertained, you know, and busy, because actually there's nothing for them to do, and their life has kind of almost stalled as a result of this kind of pandemic.
Well, I can see it in mine are teenagers, you know, and you can see that sort of not having those opportunities to be with their mates and hang out and have a laugh, and, you know, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do. It's but I think, I mean, Effie, we know is the poor relative, you know, it's and it is a real struggle when you drop that down those days, the motivation then when you have got to go in is really hard, isn't it?
But I think that's kind of quite common as well across, you know, when I think back to some of the stuff that I used to do, you know, in terms of supporting teenagers and stuff, it's very difficult to know how to support them, because sometimes they're not very, willing to share how you can support them. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation, that one, isn't it? So I'm not surprised in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm looking at the time, Scott, and I think that this poor woman's probably got things to do.
Well, you did say to her just 10 minutes, didn't you? And it's 50 minutes, so...
Yeah, it's stretched out a bit.
Worthwhile mentioning, Whitney Clark, who I talked to last night for an upcoming episode of the Conversations on the Adoption Fostering podcast. She's 22, and she has commented a couple of times, and she said it's nice to hear that actually someone like you, Jane, has shown a little bit of love and empathy and compassion to these young people. She's a care experienced young adult, and having talked to Whitney, I'm not going to give too much away, but someone like you could have really helped Whitney in where she lived. So I can see why she would say that. But you are very passionate, and you're very considerate of the young people that you help to parent, shall we say. I don't know if that's the right word.
I mean, I've been in my job long enough to see the kids we supported when they were 6 become adults, and that it's absolutely lovely seeing them getting their jobs and learning to drive and taking part in all kinds of things and keeping in touch. We keep in touch, and it's just it's an honour in many ways to sort of be.
Well, I've made a really important decision, and that is that I'm going to send all 3 of my young people to live with you for 6 months once the pandemic's over. Okay.
Well, when I don't have to work from home anymore, I have got a spare room.
No, not all 3 in the same room. They kill each other.
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jane, for coming on, and really appreciate you having your time. If people have got this far in the podcast, should they attend our conference on the 12th of March, Scott?
Oh, I forgot about that, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, shame on you.
I did, didn't I? So now we're going to pause for a commercial break.
Infomercial. Well, are you struggling with children who display? No, it's so on the 12th of March we're doing a little practice day, half-day conference, 9:30 till 12:30, for parents, carers, foster carers, special guardians, adoptive parents, anyone who's kind of struggling with caring and supporting children whose behaviour sometimes is a little bit less than ideal, or a bit fractious, or a bit complicated. Let's say complicated, interesting, flamboyant, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do a morning. We're going to look at some of the impacts on families. We're going to look at how to kind of mitigate those impacts, but also how to support families to kind of care for those children and give you some tips and tricks. I'm going to pack a lot in, but we're looking forward to it. It is £25 for a ticket. You can get it through the Facebook page. That'd be all on there. And if you buy 5 tickets, it'll only cost you the price of 4.
Congratulations, you got it correct, Mr. Gold.
That I've consistently got wrong. But anyway, that's all very hush-hush. We're gonna do a proper thing about that. So Jane, thank you so much. And
thank you, Jane. Lovely to see you as well.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to see you both. Thank you. Yes.